Table 4, a short work of fiction by Lucien Maier, narrated by Tammy Maier.
Sarah felt like an idiot. She had made so many mistakes tonight, she was surprised that they had not fired her on the spot. Jodie, her trainer, had been a godsend, helping squeeze her out of her mistakes. She wished that she would have had more time with learning from her, but it was Jodie's last night at the restaurant. Jodie had started a business on the internet and had done quite well for herself. Sarah sat with her back against the brick wall, inhaling deep, smoke filling her lungs. She heard the door creak open. Jodie came out and pulled out a cigarette and lit it. "Should I go back in?" "No." She paused for a moment, letting the smoke come out of her lungs. "I think you're going to do all right, Sarah," Jodie said. She held herself straight. She was not the smallest girl in the world, but she had wonderful curves. "I feel like I'm doing horrible," Sarah said. "Well, you are, but you're learning fast. That is more important, isn't it?" Jodie replied. Sarah sat and thought about what she had said for a while. It made such clear sense, and all the nerves and mistakes of the night seemed to wash away. Jodie smiled at her. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah asked. Jodie rolled her eyes. "Sure, and you don't have to ask." "I heard some in the kitchen talking about you leaving, and they said you had enough money to quit more than 6 months ago. Why did you stay on so long?" Sarah asked. "More like a year, really, but—" Her eyes went dreamy, and she stared off onto the highway. "I guess I've been waiting, hoping. It's silly," Jodie said. "Oh, please, I feel like there's a story there," Sarah asked. "Well, about 2 years ago, I was working in your spot as a waitress." Her eyes went dreamy as she looked out again at the highway. 2 years ago. She wanted to cry. The customers had been yelling at her all day. She blew the smoke out and slumped against the wall. Her break was done, and she needed to get back in. She set her lips in a grim determination. She walked back in the door, and the minute she walked in, Jackie seated her a new table, at Table 4 in her section. She popped in a mint and went out to Table 4. His eyes were dark and deep, and when she looked up and saw him sitting there at her table, her breath caught. The mint stuck in her throat, and she burst out coughing. She muffled them as best as she could and walked the rest of the way to the table, trying her best not to turn bright red, but not doing a very good job. "You all right?" his smooth voice asked. "Yeah, sorry, the mint got stuck in my throat." She felt like she was in high school. He smiled, revealing a crooked, although cute grin. His hair was long, down to his shoulders, and his bangs hung in his eyes. His eyes were the feature she could not get past. Once she locked eyes with him, she did not look away. Jodie was shy, and had never really looked the few guys she had dated in the eyes for more than a second here or there. But here sat a stranger who had held her gaze for over a minute before she was able to croak out. "Can I get you something to drink?" Jodie asked. "Yeah, coffee would be great," he said with a smile. He still stared into her eyes. "Okay, anything else I can start you with?" she asked. "No, just that for now," he said. "Have it for you in a sec," she said, and hurried into the back. One of the other waitresses in the back smiled huge when she came in. "Now he is yummy," she said. "Could I take over for you?" She had flirted with the customers on many occasions. "I just got back from my break," Jodie said. "You can have my lunch. I will take your section," she said. Jodie screamed in her head, "No!" But her mouth opened and slipped out, "Okay," in a very small voice. It was not like she had any chance anyway. They both walked out the coffee, but he only looked into Jodie's eyes. "I'm going to take my lunch now, but Becca is going to take care of you," Jodie smiled and said. "What are you eating?" he asked with a grin on his face. I don't know. I'll grab something from the back. Anyway, Becca—" She tried to get out, but he cut her off. "Can I buy you lunch?" he asked. "What?" Jodie asked, confused. Guys didn't really look at her, much less ask her out. "Yes, you can buy her lunch. Sit down, Jodie. What can I get for you?" Becca said. The guy at the table was lost in Jodie, and she could see it. She felt a bit jealous, but happy. Jodie worked hard and always seemed so sad. It was nice to see the sheepish grins coming from her. Jodie sat down and tried to organize herself a little bit. Can I have a Coke?" she said. Becca was off. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" she asked. "Joining me. I've been out on the road for a while. Don't get me wrong, I need the time alone, but sometimes it gets a little lonely," he said. She had noticed that he had a helmet and a jacket next to him in the booth. "Wow, you ride across country or something?" she asked, sitting up and looking out the window to see his bike. It was beat up, but it looked to her like freedom. No, just riding around and around in it. I just kinda go where the wind takes me, he said. My name is Rick, by the way. He held out his hand to shake it. She grabbed it, and in all honesty she held on a little longer than normal, but his touch had set her on fire. Sorry, I'm Jodie, she replied. That is amazing. I've always dreamed of doing something like that. What is the neatest place you've been? She asked, and thus began an hour-long conversation. When they were done, it was 7:30, and Jodie's shift would be over in half an hour. Do you know where there's a hotel around here? I was going to ride a bit more, but after hanging here so long, I better just get a room, he said. Yeah, a couple miles down the road in town. And then Jodie surprised herself. If you want, I can show you when I'm done with work in a half an hour, she asked, her face flushing red. He smiled and settled into his seat. Well, then can I have another cup of coffee? Yeah, sure. And off she went back to her work. He sat and nursed a cup of coffee, staring out the window down the highway. It called to him. For the night he had found a place he was going to stay. Tomorrow would be a new day, and the many more miles would help solve his problems. It seemed he had rode 1,000,000 miles looking for answers, and although he had found many questions, he had not found the answers he so desperately needed. His life felt paused, as if he couldn't move on. The road called to him, but tonight he pushed it away. Jodie came out from the back. Her apron was gone. She had mussed up her hair for a while in the small bathroom, but in the end she had accepted it was a mess. He smiled and got up from the table, stretched his legs the best he could. You okay? She asked, as she saw the look of pain in his face. Oh, yeah, you get used to the miles after a while, but the legs never seem to, he answered with a sly grin on his face. Okay, well, are you ready to go to your hotel? She asked. Yeah, let's do it. They walked into the parking lot. Jodie could not resist the look back at the restaurant and chuckle at the girls looking out the window at her. He swung his leg over the bike expertly and had it started with a flick of a finger. Safety first, he said, handing her the helmet. She clumsily tried to put it on. After a moment he smiled. He pulled her over and helped her get the chin strap tight. Then she stumbled onto the back of the bike. Ready? He asked as her grip tightened around him. Yes, she said through the helmet, and he hit the throttle and they were on their way. They rode down the highway into a small town, and she pointed to him a local motel. They pulled in, and a few moments later they walked out of the office with a key. You need a ride home? He asked. No, it's just a block down the street, she said before she had thought it through. The second it popped out of her mouth she regretted it. Hey, she added, hoping to spend more time with him. There's a pool hall just a couple blocks away, she pointed down the street. If you feel like coming out, I will be going there in a half an hour, she suggested. He looked down at the ground. I don't know. I have a lot of miles behind me, he said. She took it as though he did not want to see her again, and although sad, she said her goodbyes. She started the short walk home. A smile played on her lips about the evening at work. She went home. When she walked in, she debated if she wanted to go out. But in the end, Jodie decided to go, just to see on the off chance that he may show up. She took a quick shower and got ready. Half an hour later, she walked down the street to the pool hall. When she walked in, all of her friends greeted her. She looked around, but there was no sign of Rick. She sighed and walked over to the bar and got a Coke. She went over and sat with a group of her girlfriends. They all exchanged hellos. You won't believe what happened to me tonight, she said excitedly. However, the girls were staring at the front. I don't know, but I would love him to happen to me tonight, one of her friends said, looking at the new arrival that had just walked through the door. Jodie's breath caught in her throat. She turned and looked there to see Rick. He had showered and cleaned up. He looked around for a moment and then spotted Jodie and sidled over. I think he's coming over here, one of Jodie's friends said. Hi, Jodie, he said, smiling at her. Hi, Rick. Thanks for coming out, she said sheepishly. They invited him to sit down and they made introductions. They all sat and talked. Although Rick did join the conversation, he was still mostly focused on Jodie. Jodie and one of her friends excused themselves to the restroom. Once in the privacy of the bathrooms, Jodie's friends observed, How did you get so lucky? I have no idea. He is so nice, Jodie replied. Nice to look at, that's for sure. They gossiped a bit more, but Jodie was on the rush to get back to the table. She slid in next to him at the table, and he gave her a big smile in return. They talked and had more drinks. The door opened again, and Jodie's worst nightmare began. It was her ex-boyfriend and his 2 buddies. She had finally left him 2 months before because he had been abusive and possessive over her. "We should go," she said to Rick, raising from her chair. Rick immediately knew what was going on and placed a calm hand on her shoulder. "Rick, we really should. He is really going to flip," she said. Not the moment that it came out of her mouth, she heard Tom, her ex-boyfriend, say, "What the fuck?" Anger flared into his eyes, and he started to walk over. He made it to the table, and Jodie looked up, her eyes fearful. "Who is this guy, Jodie?" he asked, the anger apparent in his voice. "It don't matter. You and Jodie broke up, 'member, Tom?" one of Jodie's friends snapped at him. This just flew him into a larger rage. "Come on, Rick, let's go," Jodie said and started to stand up. Tom grabbed her shoulder and forced her down into the chair. "You ain't going anywhere," he said. Rick cocked an eyebrow at him. "Don't do that again," he warned. His voice was stern and calm. "You need to get out of here, whoever you are," Tom snarled back. "All right, Jodie, you're right then," Rick said again in a confident and calm voice. "Not her, fuckhead, just you," he returned. "Yes, Tom, I'm going. Goodbye." She and Rick got up. Tom grabbed her arm. "You're not listening, bitch," Tom said. "No, you didn't listen to me," Rick replied and pulled his arm from Jodie. Tom hauled back and let a punch fly towards Rick. He easily sidestepped it. Tom's 2 buddies were on top of him, but Rick had obviously had some training. Within a couple of seconds, the buddies were laying on the ground, one knocked out and the other groaning in pain. "That's it, fuckhead, I'm gonna kill you," Tom barked. He had grabbed the pool cue and swung it at Rick, but Rick caught the pool cue and held it tight. He'd made a quick movement and hit Tom on the side of the head with it. Then he tossed it aside. "That stick is not going to help you," Rick said, smiling. Tom was beside himself. He had never been outmatched. He lurched in again. Rick again easily sidestepped him, but this time tripped him and sent Tom sprawling on the floor. Rick walked over and placed his knee on Tom's neck. Tom struggled to get free but was held tight. "Now you listen to me. From now on, you don't talk to Jodie. If you see her, you go to the other side of the street. You avoid her like the plague, 'cause if you don't, next time I won't be so nice. You hear me?" Rick asked. Tom struggled even harder, so Rick applied more pressure on the neck. Tom screamed in pain. "You hear me?" Rick asked again. "Yeah, I hear you. I'll leave her alone," Tom squeaked out. Rick let out the pressure and then stood up. "Girls, it was nice to meet you, but I think it's time for me to go," Rick said. "Can I still go with you?" Jodie asked in a small voice. "Of course," he replied, and offered his hand to help her up. They started out the door. "I'm so sorry, Rick," she said to him, but before he could reply, Tom's hand was on her shoulder. He forced her around, but Jodie had had enough. As he turned her around, she balled her fist and hit Tom full force in the jaw. A large smack echoed, and a strange look washed over Tom's face. He dropped to the ground, completely knocked out. Rick could not help but laugh at the sight. The whole pool hall was quietly watching. Rick smiled big. "Well, good night, everyone," he said to everyone, and then he and Jodie turned toward the door and walked out. They strode to the hotel. "Well, next time I'll let you protect me, slugger," he said with a chuckle. Jodie smiled, embarrassed. "I have to admit, it felt great," Jodie said, smiling. "My hand hurts like hell, though." "I wish our time would have not been cut short," Jodie said. "Well, not to be forward, but do you want to come to my room? We can get some ice for your flying fist of fury and rent a movie," Rick said. She hesitated, but only for a moment. "Okay," she said with a smile. They went to the room, and he set her up with a towel full of ice for her fist. "Next time, hold your fist a little tighter and it won't hurt so much." He smiled, putting the ice on her hand. "I hope there won't be next time," Jodie said. "That's even smarter," Rick said. They wound up watching a movie on the hotel TV. She on one bed in the room and him on the other. After the movie, and through, for that matter, they talked. He was so open with his feelings. He had been on the road sorting out his feelings. He had lost his family in a car accident, and after he had settled their estate, he hit the road. She could see the sadness in his eyes. Her heart went out to him. They talked about Tom and how she'd knocked him out. Their conversation lasted until late into the night. Jodie was a bit ashamed, but she knew Rick could have her in any way he wanted that night. However, he never made a move. It was 2 a.m. when she got up to leave. "I guess I better go," she said to him. "Oh, well, all right," You could sleep on the extra bed if you'd like, or at least let me give you a ride to your place, Rick offered. No, I'd love to stay, she said, and settled back down onto the bed. They talked for a bit longer, but soon they were both drifting off to sleep. Would you mind if I slept in your bed? She asked. Not at all, he said, and she got up and got into his bed. He made no move toward her. He just wrapped his arms around her in a wonderful comfort she had never felt. They both drifted off to sleep. They slept in the next morning, and when they finally got up, Rick started to get his gear together. Guess I can't convince you to stay, can I? She asked. No, not right now, but maybe when I'm ready I'll come back and see if you're still around, he smiled. You know, last night we could have done more than sleep, she said, her face turning red. Yeah, I know, but Jodie, you're more than just a body. Don't get me wrong, you're stunning to look at, but I'm more interested in your heart and your brain, Rick replied. She swooned. He could not have said it more perfectly. She got up and looked on the dresser for the necklace that she had made. It was gone. Weird. I left my necklace right here, she said, beginning to look around. Rick smiled. Well, if you really want it back, I'll give it to you, but I was hoping to keep it as a souvenir, he explained. He had it around his neck already. Yeah, you can have it. I can make another one, she replied. They walked out to the bike and Rick got on. Take care of yourself, Jodie. I promise I'll swing by once I get my head straight, Rick said. You be careful on that bike of yours, and you better come back. You owe me $20 for the necklace. She smiled. He reached for his wallet, but she pushed his hand away. No, it will give you a reason to come back and see me, Jodie said. He let go of his wallet. Fair enough, but I won't come back to pay you. I'll come back to see you. Jodie, you're remarkable. Don't forget that sitting out here. You're bright, good-hearted, and stunning. I hope you make your dreams come true, he said with a crooked smile. She cuddled into his arms for a hug, and when she pulled back, he kissed her long with great passion. When they parted their lips, they fell back into their embrace. She held on to him as long as she dared. Finally they broke, and he strapped his helmet on. She smiled and pulled down his visor for him. The bike started, and he popped it into gear and rode off toward the highway. She watched until he was out of sight. Then she began her walk home. 2 years later. Jodie finished the story, and Sarah blew out a big sigh. Wow, I can see why you would wait for that. One of the other girls poked her head out of the door. Hey, we just got slammed. You guys coming in? She asked. Jodie walked up to the hostess counter. Telling the story had made her a bit sad. She just looked down. The next customer paying their tab came up. Jodie's eyes were straining to hold back tears, so she did not look up at the customer. He paid the tab and then put a $20 bill on the counter. I still owe you that, he said with a smile. She looked up and her dream stood right in front of her. Rick smiled at her. What time do you get off, slugger? He asked. Jodie walked around the counter and gave Rick a hug and said, I think they can handle it from here. She took off her apron and they walked out of the restaurant, and soon a single tail light disappeared toward town. The girls in the restaurant stood in awe, and Sarah just smiled. What an amazing thing, she thought to herself. One of the older waitresses smiled and said, See, girls, love always finds a way.